Everyone, and welcome to meeting number 100 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on the Status of Women. Today's meeting is taking place in hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I would like to make a few comments for the benefits of the members and witnesses. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize your name. For those participating on video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For those in the room, your mic will be controlled by the Proceedings and Verification Officer. You may speak in your official language of your choice, and interpretation services are available. You have the choice on the bottom of the screen of either floor, English, or French, and if interpretation is lost, please immediately inform us. Although this room is equipped with a powerful audio system, feedback events can occur. These can be extremely harmful to the interpreters and cause serious injuries. So we're just asking you to be very aware of getting your mic near, or your earphone near your mic. And a reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. With regarding to a speaking list, the committee clerk and I will do the best we can to maintain a consolidated order of speaking for all members, whether they're participating virtually or in person. As we know today, we are starting a very important study, and pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, November 27, 2024, the committee will commence its study of the implementation of the Red Dress Alert. I just want to give a little bit of context on this as we're starting this. In its 2019 final report, the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls called for the establishment of a nationwide emergency number to ensure consistent protocols to investigate cases of missing Indigenous women and girls across provinces and territories. The committee agreed to study a red dress alert after the House of Commons declared that violence against Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirited people in Canada is an emergency. The House called on the Government of Canada to provide investments for a red dress alert system through a motion adopted unanimously on May 2nd of 2023. The committee will be hearing from expert witnesses on how such an alert system should be implemented here in Canada. To begin, we have two witnesses for our first panel. I would like to welcome online, we have from the British Columbia Association of Aboriginal Friendship Centres, we have Leslie Varley. She is the Executive Director. And from the Union of Nova Scotia Micmac, we have Jennifer Jesty, who is the Emergency Resiliency Manager. We're going to start off with providing you each 5 minutes for your opening comments. To Leslie, you'll see me saying start winding it up in the last 15 seconds, and I'll probably a few seconds after we'll have to cut you off so we get times for questions. But I'm going to pass it over to you, Leslie, first for the first 5 minutes. Go ahead, Leslie, you have the floor.
The Red Dress Alert System in British Columbia must be a central feature of a comprehensive provincial service delivery model that should be led by Indigenous women representatives of and providing services to all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis, urban and off-reserve, status and non-status Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQT+ people. I'll get to the why shortly. The province is thinking about two Red Dress Alert pilot projects in BC, one along the Highway of Tears, which runs over 700 kilometers from Prince Rupert to Prince George. The other pilot is for an urban area, perhaps Surrey or Vancouver. So what would these pilots look like? They might rely on different tools, and they must be coordinated by the same central Indigenous women-run provincial agency. Looking at the northern pilot, a primary tool will be billboards. There are signs on First Nations land that advertise coffee shops, hotels, and such. We could negotiate agreements to electrify these signs, enabling red dress alerts, and the nation can revert to the usual advertising when there's no alert. Where there are no existing billboards, we could negotiate agreements to install them. There are at least 10 provincial points along the Highway of Tears that would need signs, and we would need them facing both eastward and westward for all traffic in most of these small towns. So we'd need a minimum of 20 signs that would have photographs and information about the missing person, a QR code, and a central phone number to call. Signs could be programmed to alert a missing person along the entire highway in the direction we think the person is heading, or we could focus in a smaller region where we know the person was very recently seen and might still be in that area. Electrified signs could be used in combination with apps. Both the urban and rural pilots would utilize newly created apps that people would voluntarily download. One app is a sort of Find My Missing Loved One app that people would use to search for loved ones in a coordinated and organized way, where the app could show grids and offer other functions. We would also need a similar nationwide app that would work for both urban and rural applications. Indigenous people currently use existing social media for searches. We're already connected to each other, but coordination should be centralized and effectively targeted and managed. The apps and signage should also draw in mainstream Canadians. An urban pilot might rely more on apps and less on billboards. We need an Indigenous-run anonymous app to report sightings or to relay information we might know about a missing person. The City of Vancouver recently moved to provide free Wi-Fi in the downtown east side, where Indigenous women continue to be at high risk. Urban Indigenous community is small and we notice each other, but we know there's a lot of human trafficking, which is often gang run and therefore dangerous. We need to have safe, anonymous reporting of sightings of missing persons so that those reports can be made without fear of retaliation. Given the size of the province, we need a central system to coordinate with emergency services, police services, victim services, anti-violence services, transition and safe houses. I stated the need for the development of a provincial Indigenous women-centered organization. I envision an Indigenous org for Indigenous people to report missing women, to analyze data from apps, and to provide services related to violence. The org would provide a standardized search training and could get funds out to community within the hour to immediately start a search. It would provide community-based wraparound services for victims who've been found. It would coordinate and disperse provincial and federal anti-violence funds and oversee ongoing development of Indigenous anti-violence capacity. An Indigenous women-centered service model addresses the distrust and discomfort Indigenous people have with police services, the larger justice system, and with existing mainstream anti-violence service bodies. These apps won't work for Indigenous people if they are police or mainstream run. If appropriately structured, an Indigenous women-centered organization will effectively serve all Indigenous women and girls and 2S LGBTQT plus people. It disperses training and capacity funds and evaluates the change that we desire. And finally, an Indigenous women-led agency can keep safe the missing women who report into the agency to state that they're not indeed missing. They simply don't want to be found for safety purposes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leslie. We're now going to move it over to Jennifer Jesty, who is with the Union of Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq. Jennifer, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Jalasi Waldasi Bejidayo, welcome, and so nice to see you all. My name is Jennifer Jesty, and I am the first Indigenous woman to become a member of the Nova Scotia Firefighters Association, along with being the first Indigenous woman to become an advanced care paramedic in the province of Nova Scotia. Currently, I am the Emergency Resiliency Manager for the Union of Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq. 4,127. That's how many people are registered to receive alerts across our 5 Cape Breton Indigenous communities, for which I created our very own Onamagi Emergency Alert System. 183. That's how many alerts we've sent since its inception in September of 2020. 67. That's how many young people we have reunited with their families because of the alerts. 96. That's the percentage of people that have been reunited with their families within the first hour of sending the alert. 96%. Utilizing the Everbridge platform, our Onamagi Emergency Alert System has been wildly successful. Every time we send a noteworthy alert, several more people subscribe. In August of 2022, there was a man that had a French accent, a white beard, and was driving a gray car. This person approached a young Indigenous female store clerk and attempted to lure her into the sex trade. He made promises of riches and asked her to get her friends to come with him as well. She immediately called the police and the man fled. The chief of the community where this took place immediately called me and asked me to send out the alert. For all we knew, he could have been headed to one of our other communities. Because we own and operate this alert system, we did not need to go through any red tape. We did not need the say-so from authorities, and we did not need to wait 1 more minute. I sent the alert within minutes of this event taking place, and I was able to send it to all 5 communities at once. The alert was not only sent to the over 3,000 subscribers we had at that time, but some of them took screen captures, of the alert and posted it on their socials, which meant it reached far more than those that were actually registered. After that alert was sent, another 150 people subscribed to our alert system. Because this system was designed by us, for us, we are able to create our own protocols around when, how, and why an alert should or shouldn't be sent. The collaboration between our 5 community chiefs and myself allowed us to use this system in a manner that works best for us. There has not been one single request for an alert that has been denied, and every single alert has been sent out within minutes of receiving the information. The Everbridge platform gives us the ability to tailor the delivery of the message. Once the message has been typed out, with the press of one button, it will send to all forms of communication at once. It will text a cell phone, call a cell phone, send an email, and, most importantly, call a landline. There are still several of our elders that have a landline and no other form of communication. In some areas, there is no or very little cell service, which makes the landline option that much more important. I was able to work with Everbridge to make some adjustments. We are now able to send just a text and an email, or the second option is what we call all paths, which means it will then ring a landline. Waking an elder in the middle of the night with a landline call is now reserved for immediate threat to life and safety only. We can choose to not wake people if it's something that does not directly affect them or that they can do nothing about. Currently, the chief and 2 other staff in each community have been trained and have access to send the alerts along with myself. I was worried that the username and password for each community might fall into the wrong hands, so it's been designed that the only thing the username and password will allow you to do is send a message. It will not give access to the sensitive data that is within the system. As the administrator, I am the only person that can see, change, or update that information. This alert system started out as a simple little idea in my mind. I had no idea it was going to take on a life of its own. People continue to subscribe even now after 4 years. We often send out media campaigns to remind people to register or update their information. Now, our alert system is getting nationwide attention. When there is something going on within communities, people are quick to take to social media asking, "Where's the alert?" There's a sure sign in community that members support, approve of, and rely on our alert system for critical information that directly affects their safety. In my perfect world, I would love to take this alert system to every single Indigenous community in this entire country. Would it save lives? I believe it already has. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're now going to start with our first round of questions, 6 minutes each to each party. We'll turn the floor over to Michelle Frary, and you have 6 minutes, Michelle.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to our witnesses. This is obviously a very important study, and I love that you ended, Jennifer, with how this has already saved lives. I like that. I want to read into the record a few stats for people who are watching at home. When we look at this red dress alert and the very shocking statistics on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Between 2009 and 2021, the rate of homicide against First Nations, Métis, and Inuit women and girls was 6 times higher than the rate among non-Indigenous counterparts. 81% were killed by someone they knew, 35% were killed by an intimate partner, 24% were killed by an acquaintance, 22% were killed by a family member, 86% were killed by an Indigenous person. And ironically, today, the Auditor General did release a report on Indigenous housing, and I think there's a real link when we look at all of these issues. The First Nations housing, there's been no meaningful improvement in housing conditions in First Nations, and from 2015 to 2022, the percentage of homes in First Nations that needed to be replaced increased. And the other shocking one is mold has been a massive issue on nation housing. Despite this, only one Indigenous Service Canada regional office collected information. The 2008 mold strategy is no longer being used, and no reasoning as to why. So you can see there's just been a real disconnect in terms of servicing these communities, and the stats say that the violence is happening within them, but we're also not giving the supports and resources needed. the two things that jumped out at me when you gave your testimony, Jennifer, was one, that the government wasn't in charge of this app. And I would be very curious to hear your thoughts on, would you like the government to be in control of the red dress alert system?
Thank you for your question. No, I don't believe that this should be a government run. It should be community led. Just as our alert system is, it was designed by Indigenous for Indigenous. And I do believe that's the way the alert system for the Red Dress campaign is going to be most effective.
That's powerful. Thank you. And I think, and one of the reasons I wanted to read those stats into the record is just the record that has not been fulfilled in terms of those broken promises in the housing and the conditions. But also the other thing that jumped out at me is you said you're the only one. That doesn't seem like a great system if and when something does happen to you. What would you like to see done differently there?
Well, it was we needed to get this up and running as quickly as possible. That was the whole purpose. And so, yes, that means Jennifer is on call 24/7, 365, but that's okay. That's just for now. Now that the alert system has taken on a complete life of its own, it is time to bring in another way or another person. So although, yes, I am available 24/7, what if something happened to me? What if? Who's my backup? So I have developed a complete instruction book, detail by detail, screenshots included, to hand over to my superior, along with some of my colleagues, that if, in fact, I were to be unable to do this, somebody else can carry on my legacy.
I mean, it's incredible, and this is how things get done. It is the power of one. It is one person. We hear these stories often. It's like, this isn't rocket science. It's just I took action. That's the real missing piece, and you did that. And huge accolades to you for doing that and saving the lives that you have saved. I guess here today, one of the big things we have to ask, that we've all agreed on this red dress alert. It's going to save lives. I guess from this testimony, what would you like us to know to ensure that there are more Jennifers out there, that it's not just on your shoulders to take action, that there is the opportunity for communities across this country to have this implemented and working efficiently?
So I was hired right in the middle of the pandemic and literally had nothing to do. I couldn't go into community. I couldn't visit. I couldn't even introduce myself. And so I kind of sat there and thought to myself, what can I do? We were right on the heels of the Portapique incident in Nova Scotia, which was the largest mass shooting in Canadian history. And I started to think, what if? What if somebody walked into one of our communities and opened fire? What are we going to do? Well, what's the first thing we need to do? We need to tell everybody. How are we going to do that? And so was born the Unama'ki Emergency Alert System. I don't think it needs to be a one-person event. What it needs to be done is you need to do something. I didn't get it right out of the gate. We made some mistakes in the very beginning, and I do believe it's for the red dress alert, it's not going to be perfect right out of the gate either. But it's time to do something. The one thing for me was I kind of did this all on my own. I came up with the idea. I presented it to my superior and said, can I do this? She said yes, and away I went. I didn't ask for anybody's permission. I didn't ask for anybody's help. I just did it. And I think maybe that's partly to its success, is sometimes when there are so many voices telling their own opinions and giving their own ideas, things don't get done. So I think we're in a position right now where you just need to do something.
You're here. That's what we call bureaucracy here. Less bureaucracy, my friend. How is it funded?
I started out with using funding from my own program when I first started the program. After it's the first year...
And sorry, just because I only have a few seconds, 20 seconds. How is it funded? How much does it cost?
It's based on how many people would be subscribed to the system through the Everbridge platform. And currently, mine is funded through Indigenous Services Canada EMAP program.
How much?
I'm not really sure. I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $8,000 per year for 10,000 subscribers and under.
If you can submit it to the committee, if you get that information, it would be very useful for us.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're now going to pass it over for the next 6 minutes to Anita. Anita, you have the floor for 6.
Thank you so much, Ms. Justy, for being here. Thank you, of course, to both witnesses. I think it's remarkable what you were telling us about your accomplishments, 96%. I just think that if that were extrapolated across the country, what incredible impact that would have. So the question I have to you in particular is, you emphasized, and I heard you emphasize in your testimony, that because it is owned and operated by the community, that this is specifically what allows you to be able to act quickly and nimbly and be able to do it in a way that actually supports the community. So can you tell us different models and how something like that might be replicated elsewhere? And I guess in that same sense, what would be the role of law enforcement in that? Because I think what you were saying is you didn't have to wait for anything. You could just act. If you could just give us some lessons for if we were to expand that.
Sure. So for every missing person in our community, the law enforcement is involved. If I'm contacted directly by a community member to say my loved one is missing, can you send an alert? Did you contact the police? The reason for that is I want to make sure there's a record. And I want to make sure a said person is not over at Auntie's place, or it needs to be a true missing person. We don't want to cause alert fatigue. So we don't want to be sending out alerts for missing people who are not truly missing. People who have threatened self-harm, we sent out alerts for that. Again, law enforcement is involved. It took a lot to get their buy-in, and some of the things that they said to me were not the most pleasant, but it was nothing but pure persistence on my end to knock on their door, send them phone calls, emails, and saying, please utilize our system. It's a tool. It's a tool in your toolbox that you can utilize to assist in your own investigations. Once they caught on, it's a lot different now. They call me all the time.
That is very, very good to hear. I want to go to Ms. Varley, but if we have time, I have some more questions for you as well. But Ms. Varley, I'd like to pose a similar question to you in terms of the role of law enforcement and what you see as, if this were to be expanded nationally, what would be the key lessons, the key things, components that you would suggest?
I agree completely with Jennifer's model. I think the important thing is that it needs to be Indigenous run and Indigenous led, and including law enforcement in it, getting them on board is of course key, but it can't be run by the police. It needs to involve and include the police, but it can't be run by the police. So I think, the question that Jennifer asked is, did you call the police, is a key question. I think that's important to ask, to weed out the people who don't want to be found or don't want to be or are not missing. And so, there's definitely a role for police, but it's not a lead role in this process.
No, thank you very much. If I could go back to Ms. Jesty, I noted that you talked about landlines, and I'll be honest, I hadn't even considered that, but certainly for older people and in communities, those landlines might be the only way that they get information. So again, thinking about how this could be extrapolated in terms of a national program, how would you see that rolling out, and what other technical considerations do you have?
I'm a big fan of the Everbridge system, not only because we use it, and so the landline was a major component for me, but also the big other selling point for that is you can record your own message, which means the chief in the community can record his own voice in his own language before he sends the alert out. I think that's a very big, important part of it. In thinking about this red dress alert system, I see it being broken up into kind of dividing the country either by province or by area, such as, one in the Atlantic. If somebody goes missing in Halifax and we find out about it within minutes, we're sending that alert out to Halifax. 12 hours later, we'll send it out to Nova Scotia. 12 hours later, we'll send it out to the entire Atlantic. Having said that, though, what we also have to take into consideration is that you can get from one end of this country to the another by a plane ride within hours. So that also has to be taken into consideration. How do we know these people are in fact missing and have been abducted in the form of missing, as opposed to they're deciding they don't want to be found, maybe even for their own safety? Those things have to be worked out on the ground with the people who have direct contact with the people that are going to be report it missing and utilize the system.
Thank you very much. I mean, that absolutely shows why it has to be locally controlled. What about what you said about that some people are amplifying the message through their own social media, through their own mechanisms? I'm very interested in hearing about that because obviously you want to get people where they are, and some people will not necessarily get a message unless it's through something that they use day to day. Could you talk more about how it's being amplified?
Yes, so most people now, as soon as we send out an alert, I would say 80% of our messages are going out by the text-only option. So it's sending a text message and it's sending an email. People are screenshotting that and putting that on their socials. Now it's carried to even non-Indigenous communities. Some of our community members that have been missing have gone outside of our communities, so it's very important to get the message to non-Indigenous members as well. It's every single time when I send out an alert, I immediately go to social media to have a look and say, is it being shared? And it is. So myself at UNSM, I also have my own the Onamagi Emergency Alert page on Facebook. So as soon as we send out an alert, I also post it on our Facebook page. That doesn't have a whole lot of followers just yet. It's gaining traction every month. We get a couple more. So it is, I love that they're taking the screenshot, they're putting it on their socials, and it's reaching far more people.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I'm sorry, what was that called? The system?
The UNSM Emergency Management Facebook page.
Okay. I know that we're all trying to write this down. So I'm going to now pass the floor over to Adrienne LaRoche. Adrienne, you have the floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I want to thank both witnesses for being here this morning for our first meeting on this issue. We're all eager to explore this issue because a lot of organizations have already said how Indigenous communities, and especially Indigenous women, are in difficulty, and this is an international issue. There is always a disproportionate effect on Indigenous people when there is violence. When we look at human trafficking of women and girls, Indigenous women and girls are overrepresented in human trafficking, and that is very troubling. We traveled from Vancouver to Halifax, and it was very disturbing to see the situation. So I want to come now to my questions. I want to start with Ms. Varley. This was brought up. You work in a friendship center, and there are rural people who are very impacted. But how can rural people receive an alert like a red dress alert? Can it really reach all communities? I'm really thinking about people who live remotely, who don't have good access to internet, for example, or cell service. So this question of unequal access to communications, could you answer that?
Thank you for your question. Absolutely, there is unequal access, which is why I think we still need the old-fashioned billboard model where people are driving down the Highway 16, the highway of tears, and they can see, flash those alerts flashed up on those billboards. Some of the communities are lacking high-speed internet access for sure. There is a commitment to ensure that the entire province is connected. So hopefully that's not going to be a problem for very long, but we do need a variety of applications. And so we are already connected, as I said, Indigenous people on Facebook. We all know each other. We can, put up those missing notices really quickly, as Jennifer described. But we also need some older fashioned communications models, which is why I'm suggesting the billboards in the northern and the more rural areas of the province.
Je vous écoute et j'ai une...
In listening to you, another question comes to mind, and perhaps Ms. Justy would like to jump in with her experience as well. Are you aware, because this is something that came up in our travel as a committee last year, we discovered this initiative when we had a meeting in Winnipeg on human trafficking. So not in my town. And we know that unequal access to internet and so on exists in rural airports, rather areas. And so do you know that organization called Not in My City or Not in My Town?
I'm not familiar with it.
Not familiar with it either. I'm not sure if that question was directed toward me or my counterpart. Nonetheless, you mentioned that Indigenous women are overrepresented in this area. What's sad about that comment is that this is the only area Indigenous women are overrepresented. And that's a very unfortunate situation to be in. I absolutely agree with you. We do need to have a form of communication to reach northern areas. That's why using our Everbridge platform was so important to us, so that we were able to reach that landline.
Oui, absolument, vous avez...
That's very true. I want to follow up with you, Ms. Justy. You mentioned that I mentioned that you might have something to add, and you did. With respect to the alert, you talked about the fact that reconciliation really needs to be directed by Indigenous people, and I understand that. With respect to the alert system, when women and girls disappear, do you feel that police are aware enough of this problem?
Yes, thank you. I do believe they are fully aware. Being proactive about it is a different question. So we did have an Indigenous woman go missing, reported by an off community or off reserve organization. She didn't show up for curfew. They immediately phoned the police to say, and this was at 10 o'clock at night, to say, hey, she didn't show up for curfew. The police chose not to request an alert to be sent out by me, and she was found dead the next morning. Would my alert have saved her life? Maybe, maybe not. But you didn't even give me a chance. So yes, there does need to be more work with the police organizations to get them on board and to get them to be a lot more proactive.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for that testimony. I think we're all probably dropping our jaws. I'm now going to move it over to Benita. Benita, 6 minutes.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate the witnesses today. I know this is a difficult topic, but one that you're both working so how do I say that? That you're both, I appreciate you both so much. I'm going to start with Ms. Farley. Ms. Farley, I wanted to talk a little bit about the structural factors that we need to address alongside the red dress alert. So my colleague from the NDP, Leah Gazan, when she brought this motion forward and wanted to do this study, she recognizes that there are decades of insufficient action from all levels of government that have failed to address the effects of residential school genocide. And I guess I really would like to hear from you about some of those structural factors that we need to address in government and even in policing that I heard today. What are those structural things that we can do alongside, obviously, the alert that's needed and is working, as Ms. Justy mentioned, in her community? Ms. Farley?
Thank you for the question. I think the important structural things you're talking about is the systemic racism that exists in this country. We are under the only race-based act in the Western world that we know of as Indigenous people, the Indian Act. So that is something that we have to contend with. And one of the issues that Jennifer suggested was that the police still have discretion to decide whether or not they're going to enact an alert system or support it or call her. And the reason that they don't is that they have that discretion. And when we look behind the reason of why they're not calling, it goes back to systemic racism, to the ideologies that we're raised with as Canadians about Indigenous people, and the fact that we're undeserving, or maybe we're party girls and undeserving, or, it goes back to us not being fully human. So all these old colonial ideologies about Indigenous people still exist in this country, everywhere, in every service that we're trying to access. And so the most important thing, I think, for us to address alongside providing these safeties is to socialize Canadians to understand that we are indeed human as Indigenous people, and to start working with us to dismantle these racist structures in existence.
Thank you so much. And before I move on to ask Ms. Justy the same question, I just want to have a follow-up question to you there. And I know that you work in the Aboriginal Friendship Centres, or the community that's built through these friendship centres. How can the federal government, and this is a federal committee, how can the federal government learn from the way that community comes together in our Aboriginal Friendship Centres, the way that community interacts in so much less of an institutional way? Is there something that the federal government should take away from that model, that the federal government needs to learn and to do business in a different way that you could share? I know it's a big question, but is there anything that comes into your mind?
It is a big question, and we could spend a lot of time on it. But what I think I want to say is that both federal and provincial governments could put the trust in us. I mean, we see Jessica's program operating really effectively and with very little funds. And she's done it on her own without asking for permission. In most cases, we do have to ask for permission. And so, one of the challenges that we have is trying to, when there's a missing woman who's a woman who's gone missing, it's really hard to get funds out to that agency or that community or to that family so they can immediately set up a search site, say along the Highway of Tears. It's actually really challenging, but from Indigenous community within friendship centers and within First Nations and Métis organizations, it's actually quite easy for us to get that money out to those organizations. So supporting us and trusting us to get that funding out to search groups and communities when it's needed, as and when it's needed, and with immediacy, is really key. I think that something that the government can learn from and support us to provide those services.
Thank you so much. And Ms. Jessie, I wonder if you wouldn't mind just expanding a little bit on the racism and some of the barriers that you ran into when dealing with police or any other government institutions around your alert system.
So to address your first question, asking what can government do, I think the most important thing, and this doesn't just apply to government, it applies to every person, is inclusion. It's a very simple one-word answer: inclusion. So just as I opened my statement and said that I was the first firefighter and the first paramedic, why am I the first? Why did it happen in 2020 when I was the first? Here we are in 2024 and nobody has come behind me. Why is that? Inclusion, because we're not included, that's why. And so I think inclusion in proceedings, in idealism, in moving forward in any manner, even in staff, how many Indigenous people are actually employed within non-Indigenous organizations. I think inclusion is incredibly important. At one point, when I very first started this alert system, and believe me, police organizations are pretty sick of seeing my face and hearing my name, because I won't give up. I won't give up until it gets to the point where they are calling me without hesitation. And so to answer your question, yes, I have run into several barriers along the way, even told that, oh, do you know how bad it will look on us if we send out an alert through your system before we actually sent out the provincial alert? And I go, okay, so I hear your public safety is not as important to you as your reputation. That's how it sounded to me.
Perfect.
So yes, we do still deal with that on a daily.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. We're now going to go into our second round. It's 5 minutes, 2.5 minutes for each party. So I'm now going to pass the floor over. And Anna, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to both witnesses, because this is something really important that we need to deal with. It's gone on long enough, so I admire your spirit and your strength, and I applaud you for doing what you're doing. But before I ask my question, and because we have a male here, Mark, I want to recognize you, because today is San Giuseppe Day, and it's Happy Father's Day in Italy, so Happy Father's Day, Mark.
Thank you.
So, oh, well, you know. So, can't forget about Mark. So, Jennifer, I have a couple questions for you, and then I'm going to ask a question to Mrs. Farley. One of the questions is that you talked about the mass shooting in Nova Scotia and how it rocked the entire province, especially that there was no alert system in place at the time and many lives were lost. How do you see this getting out to people that aren't subscribers in the future? I know you mentioned Facebook and people posting it.
Right. So although My Alert system is run by us for us, we do have non-Indigenous people that are signing up for the system. Why is that? Because they're not getting the information that they require anywhere else. So they see that our system is successful, that we are delivering information in a timely fashion, and we are getting it out to them quickly. I believe every single Nova Scotian has some form of PTSD regarding the Portapique incident. Therefore, people are information hungry. They want to know more information for their own personal safety. So if our alert system is attracting non-Indigenous, that's wonderful. I welcome them with open arms.
And so I want to take it back to a question that's kind of like, we know from the Arrive Scan app, it was a disaster. And your app, for very minimal amount of funds, which is incredible, I would love for you to share that with us, if you could table that to the committee, because we need to learn how to be more effective and cost efficient. And it, to me, listening to you today gives me that hope that there is a way that we can do this and not burden the taxpayer, because you're amazing. Like, I just love listening to you. So if you could table that to the committee, thank you. I would appreciate that. One of the things that I learned, and it's still embedded in my head, we did a tour last year, and I think some of my colleagues mentioned it, across the country on human trafficking. One of the things that I noticed was that they had I believe it was Sudbury, that they had the pictures of the girls in the actual airport, girls that were missing. And to Mrs. Farley's point of view, she said the billboards are impactful, and I think they are. So for areas where there is no infrastructure, would you agree that maybe incorporating both programs together would allow more people the information that they need to help the victims?
Yes, absolutely. So just recently in Cape Breton, Chief Annie Daisley of the Wigglemoth First Nation was very successful in posting billboards. That's exactly what they are. And it's a very beautiful, powerful billboard that's on the sign of each Indigenous community in Cape Breton. They may be on the mainland of Nova Scotia as well. What I hope for that, or what my vision is for that, is right on the bottom of that sign is going to be either a QR code or something to allow people to access the red dress alert system.
So we also learned during that tour, and you mentioned it earlier, that it could take minutes for them to kidnap someone, put them on a plane, and they're out of here, or drive through the hidden highways so that they can't be stopped. Mm-hmm. So when I listen to you and I listen to Mrs. Farley, we need to do this, and we need to take your program along with her ideas, the two of you together, and expand it right across the country to all areas, because I really believe that this is something that would benefit everyone, Indigenous, everyone. Would you have any disagreement in sharing that information?
Well, I've been shouting it from the rooftops since I had this up and running. Nobody's really listening, but I'm certainly not going to stop. So far, I've gone over to Lennox Island PEI and set up the exact same alert system that I have in Cape Breton with Lennox Island. I am now scheduled to go to Conn River in Newfoundland to set up the exact same there. I've assisted a couple of communities in developing the proposals to get the funding from Indigenous Services Canada. I'm waiting for them to get those proposals approved so that I can travel to their communities and assist them as well. As I said in the beginning, in my perfect world, I would love to go to every single Indigenous community. If Indigenous Services Canada EMAP funded me, why wouldn't they fund every single community in the country? I'm able to get this alert system set up in a community in an hour. It can be up and running and people can be registered within an hour.
Thank you so much. Yeah, you're 5. I know. It's just that she's got so much information to come out. I know. We really do need about 2 hours just on this panel alone, I can promise you. But what we're going to do is we're going to pass it over to Manuela for the next 5 minutes of questions.
And I want to thank both of our witnesses for their incredible testimony and the work that they're doing on the ground. I really like both witnesses' perspective on how we should go about a red dress alert. And I want to speak first to Jennifer and ask you a few questions. So you did mention that there is federal funding. It's through Indigenous Services Canada that you receive some of the funding. What is this funding helping with? And is there a need for an increase? Would you say that there are some gaps currently in the system that you do have, or ways of reaching more people that you think you could use some help with?
So the only downfall to my current system is, and this is where it probably wouldn't work nationally, we'd need to tailor it a little bit, but Everbridge is so technologically sophisticated, it can do everything but wash your dishes. So I'm sure if we were able to work with them to make the registration process for the Red Dress Alert System a little easier. Right now, I subscribe to a website called JotForm. So I went in and created my own form. It's very easy. What's your name, what's your phone number, and what community you want to receive the alerts for. We don't need any more information than that. In fact, I don't even need to know your name. You can tell me you're Donald Duck if you like. I just need to know how I get a hold of you and what community you'd like to receive the alerts for. So funding-wise, yes, I do believe there should be a little bit more funding put toward this. Everbridge is probably we're talking about tens of thousands of people registering for the Red Dress Alert System. So the funding that I receive pays for my subscription to Everbridge and also pays for my subscription to JotForm.
Okay. Thank you very much. And what strategies did you use in the beginning when you first started this system? What strategies did you use to publicize and to inform communities about it and to get that buy-in and to actually make them register? Because that step that they have to actually take themselves to register is that additional step that many people don't do. What was it that enticed people, do you think? And what lessons could be learned in order to be, effectively reaching out to communities across the country for the Red Dress Alert?
So in the very beginning, the 5 chiefs were so supportive of my idea. They gave me their summer students. We send summer students to the door of every single elder in every one of our 5 Indigenous communities. 1, to keep this culturally appropriate, and 2, to receive the elders' approval before I move forward any further. Our second step was then to go everywhere that was kind of busy. So the band office, the gas bar, the market, and sit down with paper forms. Because we do have lots of people who are still illiterate. We have to give them the option, or they don't have technology in order to sign up through a phone or an app or online. So we set out with paper forms and was able to collect that information and upload the data. Next step was to do the media campaign. We reached billboards within communities, all of which were funded by the chiefs of the communities. They were so supportive that they were able to pay for some of the advertising. We utilized community radio stations, we utilized community television stations, community billboards, and then of course social media aspects. And it was very surprising that within the first hour of launching this system in community, 1,200 people registered for the system immediately.
Thank you very much for that breakdown, and I think that there are lessons to be learned, and that we can, that ground approach, like the fact that you started on the ground, going door to door, I think that really helped as well. In terms of law enforcement, you've spoken about some of the barriers that you faced, and it's thanks to your persistence that you helped that increased cooperation between yourself and law enforcement. And I'm wondering what you would say, in general, with your experience, what you would say the response was like at first, and what type of culturally appropriate or trauma-informed training they might need. Do you think that that is it's necessary, and how do you think that the government can kind of help with that? Yes,
I do believe their training does need to be expanded. I do believe there already is cultural sensitivity training for law enforcement agencies. However, it doesn't seem to be very effective. When I first launched this system, they all thought it was a great idea. But did they actually use it? Not really. It took my constant persistence, and then the communities got involved. And it even so much where we had an incident that was related to a criminal activity where there was a large police presence in community. One of our chiefs looked out his window, and there's a man, a police officer with an AK-47 on his front lawn. And he didn't know that this was happening. And he calls me immediately and says, "Why didn't you send an alert?" I can't send an alert for something I don't know about. So bridging the gaps with the police agencies has been a difficult challenge. And still ongoing to this day. They are getting much better, but we definitely need to push it a little bit further. And if it means more cultural sensitivity training, then maybe that's what it needs to be.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We're now going to pass it over to Audrey LaRoche. Audrey, 2.5 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Ms. Jesty, congratulations, really, for all the work that you've done. And as you've said, we are really studying the financial independence of Indigenous women, and there aren't enough models like yours where Indigenous women can have visibility, can be directing their own affairs, and can move forward. Your initiative is extraordinary. In 2023, $2.5 million over 5 years was earmarked for federal, provincial, territorial work to help Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQ people. Last year, there was a first national round table on missing and murdered women and girls to determine priorities. In 2023 as well, the government appointed someone responsible for activities on the UN declaration. On all of these measures and initiatives, have you been consulted by the government?
No, this is kind of my first consultation. I did reach out to the Senior Policy Analysis for the Minister of Indigenous Affairs, spoke with me in December. I met with a committee in January, but this is my first speaking in person to government about what I've been doing. I do believe that I have to go back to, let's not complicate it. Just do something. We've been talking about it for months, and there's still not been anything done. As I said, I can set up an alert system in a community within an hour and have it up and operational. This can be very simple. It doesn't need to be as complicated as it's been.
Et merci encore une fois, Madame.
Thanks once again. I'll go to Ms. Varley. Congratulations to you as well. All of your work with the Aboriginal Friendship Centers and all of the with all of the things that I've mentioned about that happened last year. Have you been consulted?
I'm sorry, I didn't get a translation on that at all.
Okay, so I'm just going to let you know the time's over, but what I've done is I've stopped the clock. Please re-ask your question, and then once they answer, then we'll go on to our next round. So go ahead and ask the question.
Well, very quickly, Ms. Marley, I was congratulating you for the work that you've done.
Can you hear her? There is no interpretation, so can we, I just want to ensure you would have heard her in French or in English before. So can we just check to see how interpretation is coming, and if the witness can put up her thumb when she actually can hear? Actually, I need French, right? Can you speak so that, Audran, if you could speak?
So I was congratulating you for all of the work that you've been doing with your Friendship Center, and I want to know if you were consulted last year by the federal government about these initiatives being set up. Yes or no?
Oh, really straightforward question. We've been working with the federal and provincial governments just very recently on this, but we haven't been engaging for very long on these issues. But we've certainly been working with Minister Gary Anandasangari's crew, as well as Minister Farnworth's group here in British Columbia.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to pass it over for the next 2.5 minutes, and we'll give it to Benita for the last round of questions.
Thank you so much. I'll ask Ms. Farley first, and then one more question for Ms. Jetsy. Ms. Farley, I wanted to hear from you about what the community is saying in and around Vancouver on the red dress alert. I'm interested to hear what community thinks, and what are the conversations that are happening.
We definitely have a need for a red dress alert in the Vancouver Lower Mainland area because most of the human trafficking routes in British Columbia end up in either Surrey or in Vancouver. And so those are the areas where we have the highest urban Indigenous population. And that's the area in our Indigenous housing blocks and societies is where human traffickers are parked outside trying to attract young girls. So it is an acute need in the urban centers where we have high Indigenous population, and we're eager to get going on it.
Okay, and then just one last question, Ms. Farley. So you mentioned that you're working with the minister in Cernak right now, but we heard earlier testimony today that for Ms. Jetsy's program, it's funded through ISC. So do you see any problems or concerns with the fact that funding is coming from one ministry, whereas consultation on the red dress alert is coming from another?
I think that government is going to work together to ensure that this happens. I think that we're all astonished at how little it actually costs from Ms. Jesty's point of view and perspective. I think so. There's going to be some movement here to move this along. And certainly from a First Nations perspective, the fact that she can set this up in an hour is going to really accelerate a lot of requests coming to her to set this up. From what I'm understanding, we would love to talk with Ms. Jesty right now and get this going without asking the government for permission or asking the government for the funds to do this. I mean, it's such an urgent matter, and it seems so straightforward and, as Jessica said, simple to do. I mean, do we actually need government over the long term? Yes, but to start it up and get it going, I'd love to act right now on it.
Thank you very much. This has been an extraordinary first panel on this study, so I would really like to thank both of you for coming and providing us with such excellent testimony to really start this off. So on behalf of the committee, thank you. We are going to suspend the people. I'm going to give you a little, there's only one witness. We just had a 5-minute change here. So we have one witness that will be coming to the front of the room. But Jennifer, thank you very much. And gosh, why did I put your name somewhere else? And Leslie, thank you very much. I'm going to suspend for about 2 minutes, and we'll be right back to business. our second panel. So thank you very much for this first panel. We're coming back now. And just a few comments just to let you know. So Kurt specifically in the room, just be sure that your earpiece isn't too close to this and make sure that's in French or English, whatever is your choice of language so that you can hear interpretation. But it is excellent to have you here, and I'd like to welcome our guest today. From Palmerex Corporation is Kurt Eby, Director, Regulatory Affairs and Government Relations. As I mentioned, we just had a last-minute change there, so that's what happened. Is she still on right now? Okay. Just changing some things up. So what we'll be doing is we'll be giving Kurt his 5 minutes, and then we'll continue with the regular meetings. Our person is now rescheduled for Thursday. So Kurt, I'm going to give you the floor for your opening statements. 5 minutes, please.
Great, thank you. I'm pleased to be here to speak with the committee about the critical issue of red dress alerts. Founded in 1989, Palmerex is best known for its The Weather Network and Meteo Media television channels, websites, and mobile apps. Indeed, we are a Canadian institution. Most recent public polling has shown that the Weather Network and Meteo Media are Canada's most trusted media brand and Canada's most trusted news source. Palmerex is also a global, trilingual weather, alerting, safety, and technology company that serves consumers, governments, and businesses alike and reaches 60 million people every month, all while remaining a family-owned Canadian business. For the past 14 years, Palmerex has operated the National Alert Aggregation and Dissemination System, which is the software infrastructure of Canada's first and only national public alerting system, also known as Alert Ready. The CRTC approved Palmerex's proposal to build the NAD system in 2009, which initially enabled emergency alerts to be sent to TV and radio stations. Cell phone alert capability was added in 2018. If you have ever received an alert for instance like a tornado, flood, wildfire, or to notify of an abducted child anywhere in Canada, that alert was processed and delivered by our NAD system in less than 5 seconds from the time the issuer hit send. In 2023, more than 1,000 emergency alerts, the type that interrupt TV or radio or set off the attention siren on your phone, were sent in Canada to warn of an immediate threat to life or property. An additional 70,000 warning watches and advisories for non-life-threatening situations are processed by the NAD system every year and distributed by services like the Weather Network. Palmerex is constantly innovating and exploring opportunities to deploy the latest advances in technology for better alerting. And each year, the NAD system is being used more and more to issue alerts that are helping to mitigate impacts and are unquestionably saving lives. There is nothing we do at Palmerex that makes us more proud. We also recognize that, as with any evolving technology solution, there are opportunities for improvement. Specifically, any instance where the NAD system could be used to save a life should be explored, including red dress alerts. Red dress alerts should be issued and processed using the NAD system. It is the national system. It is secure, fully redundant, supported, tested, and reliable. It is the only system that delivers life-saving alerts directly to all TV and radio broadcasters and cell phone providers without requiring consumers to sign up or opt in. The system has been constantly enhanced and improved over 15 years at the direction of federal, provincial, and territorial public safety officials, and the technology is second to none. In fact, no alerting system in the world processes more alerts and reaches more people than the NAD system. Palmerex is set to add a red dress event code to the NAD system and can do so in a matter of hours. However, we do not determine what situations warrant an alert. That decision rests with public safety authorities and government agencies. Technically, Palmerex is the software provider for Alert Ready. We provide and maintain the user interface and the processing system. We upgrade the technology. We train users on how to use the technology, and we administer accounts. As such, we can answer questions about the technical requirements to enable red dress alerts in the NAD system. But in practice, we also take a broader and active interest in advancing public alerting in Canada overall. We led and defined the concept of a public alerting system in Canada 15 years ago. We built the system, and we helped to bring all the relevant authorities to the table to use it and continue to improve it. We have knowledge of public alerting that stands well beyond the technology. I would be pleased to share any of that knowledge that may help make red dress alerts a reality. This includes how new alert types are added to the approved list of events and how the system access is managed. Finally, if any additional technical solutions or additions are needed to address any challenges or for use cases specific to red dress alerts, Palmerex can assist with that as well. With more than 8 million app users and 24 million digital users overall in Canada, no Canadian company has a more proven track record of delivering critical information to more people. Thank you for your time. I'm looking forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much, Kurt. So we'll be starting off with our 6-minute rounds of questions, and I'll pass the floor over to Dominique. Dominique, you have 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and good morning, Mr. Eby, and welcome to our committee, which is just starting a very important and serious study on safety and security of Indigenous women and girls. Thanks for your presentation. I may not be the most technologically advanced of the group here, and you have talked about different aspects of your software. You were in the room, you heard the testimony of our 2 witnesses before you. What they are asking for, basically, is for a national project that would be run by Indigenous to help women. How could that kind of collaborative approach with a private company, and especially to reflect the particular perspective of Indigenous women, how could that be developed?
What the previous witness has said is exactly right, working with the communities. Right now, we work within the jurisdictions in Canada, so to issue alerts. So if the federal government, primarily Environment and Climate Change Canada, and then all of the provincial and territorial public safety agencies, then they typically decide within their jurisdiction who gets to issue an alert, and we kind of heard a bit about that from Ms. Jesty. But obviously this is a different case, and it's really, I think, important to work with the communities. And if we were either given that direction by, we basically have a board that oversees what we do, we would do that. I think failing that, we would be, if the alternative is another private company doing it, we would want to step up and do that as well. And, I think obviously we hear it's a different use case, and the witnesses talked about also having maybe like a clearinghouse to share information on where if victims have been seen and things like that, and protecting privacy that are different than what alerts are used for right now. We could build all of that. We would want everything to be processed by the national system. That's what it's made for. This is a national issue, and I think that this should be part of the national system, but I think also we've heard and recognized that it would be important to have this consultation and direction from those who it affects the most.
I assume that you have more than 2 employees working for you?
Oui? Yes, correct.
That's reassuring. Thank you. How would it work with respect to costs? How does it work if somebody wants to collaborate with your company? How do you get paid? Suppose we decide to launch a Canada-wide system in line with Indigenous approaches. How do you get your costs covered? How would that collaboration work with your company?
So the way it works right now is we actually paid for the whole system, and we have from its inception through a condition of our broadcasting license that is part of having the Weather Network and Meteo Media on the basic cable package, which guarantees us access to all homes in Canada and a certain amount of fixed revenue. And that was the model that we proposed in 2009 to the CRTC when we envisioned this whole system, and that's the way it is now. We have a budget that we put forward, and we work to that budget every year. If we're talking about adding new channels and things like that, we would probably seek some additional funding for that, but commensurate with the costs. But to be clear, like.
But who would you be charging then? How does that really work?
I would think that if ideally you want to just the concept of charging every First Nation or every community, I think, is not the best option. You want it to be a national system with open access for all First Nations and all communities. So I think either the provinces or the federal government singularly would be most ideal. But that's these are more business decisions. But that would be probably the easiest way to open it up and have everyone be able to use it.
Right now, this system, which is well known to people and it is integrated, the Amber Alert, when we receive those alerts that people are familiar with, could something similar be developed with the needs of Indigenous women in mind? Could that be done?
Absolutely, yeah. Everyone's familiar with the Amber Alert. We recently added Silver Alerts to the system, which is if someone with Alzheimer's or dementia or cognitive disabilities goes missing, you issue what's called Silver Alert. That's being piloted in Quebec. There has been some Silver Alerts issued. It's really no different than that. It's another vulnerable person use case, and you would add that to the system and issue the alerts the same way. And I think this is a well-known issue. I think Canadians generally, if they saw red dress alert, they would understand what it was talking about.
Madame,
It's 6 seconds. You're done. Sorry. Your time.
I'm done.
Oui. Sorry. There goes your
En
alarm.
tout cas, je sais pas, mais en milieu rural.
I just wanted to say that in rural areas there is this problem of access to telephone service and so on.
We'll have lots more questions. We've got a couple rounds, so it's okay. So I'm now going to pass the floor over to Mark. Mark, you have the floor for 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witness, Mr. Eby, for being here today for this study, which is very important.
So right now you do a missing persons alert right now in Ontario. The Amber. So, and you just mentioned that you're also you added now the Silver Alert. Thank you for doing that on dementia. I think it's very important. So why are you not just adding, the red dress alert? You've done it for other categories, and I'll ask the process afterwards. But I wanted to.
So as I said, we don't decide to add those. I mean, we built like a national system, and so we,
So who decided to put the Silver Alert for dementia?
The senior officials responsible for emergency management. It's also known as SORM. So it's basically the senior officials for emergency management from all the provinces, territories, and Public Safety Canada sit on a board, and they meet and talk about all sorts of public safety issues. And this is one. And there's a thing called it's called the BI list, the Broadcast Immediate List, and it's all the events. We get told what the event is, we add it into the system, and then when someone logs into the user interface, they see that as one of the options for an alert that they can send. And so those are the rules right now.
So it appears that a lot of and that's the systemic problems that we seem to have. We've heard from witnesses in the past and even today that a lot of the missing Indigenous women are not getting through the proper police authority, because you're saying you don't decide on, but you work in Ontario with the OPP only. Is that correct? Do you work with First Nations?
So we have contracts with every province and territory, Environment and Climate Change Canada, NRCan, and Public Safety Canada. Within every province, they decide how to use the system. I have a list here that shows
So within every province?
Because public safety is a provincial jurisdiction, so it's up to them. So 26 First Nations in Alberta have access to the system. Almost basically
So the
none.
provinces are saying they're not adding the First Nation because it's not a provincial jurisdiction, it's a federal jurisdiction?
No, they've just chosen not to. I mean, for instance, some provinces have like one agency or two agencies total that use the system, and so you would want to talk to the provinces about why they aren't pushing that out further.
Because we heard clearly, the Indigenous-led here, like they had Jennifer from Nova Scotia, clearly how important that is. And right now, you're not dealing with any of the First Nations. You're just dealing with the provincial authorities.
Correct. Yes. So we deal with under the present jurisdiction. About a year and a half ago, I appeared before the Indigenous Northern Affairs Committee and said we would love direction from the federal government or provincial governments or both to work directly with First Nations because the nature of the jurisdiction there, and so we're still waiting for that.
So what recommendation would you have? Obviously, this is a federal committee, so we're looking at federal jurisdiction, but what is the separation between the provincial and now what federal? What do you need from the federal government to make this more national and also Indigenous-led?
Well, we would need direction that would come probably from SORM, so we would want all of
That's the provincial?
All the federal government and the
federal?
provinces together
Okay.
to say, like, yes, please go and start working with the First Nations. Or another group works with the First Nations and just comes to us and says, here's the technical aspects to add to the system that are needed. And that's, that's as a technical provider, that's what we would do.
But can you work with the Nova Scotia, for example, Micmac organization that has their app, and how can your system integrate with existing First Nations-led app? How would that integrate?
We have a piece of national secure infrastructure. We can take other alerts and then run it back through our system if needed, but ideally we would work with them directly. They wouldn't need another vendor, another private company to do it. They could just use the system. And to be clear, I applaud what they've done to go and take that on, but I think that's not necessarily necessary.
Can you explain in 30 seconds how the process, so you need to get a call from the OPP. If you get the Anishinaabe First Nations, they can't call you, so it's only the OPP. What's the process?
To set up an account?
Or just to put a red alert?
We don't issue the alerts. We give an interface. They type it in. We don't touch it. It goes in 5 seconds. So the provincial government would say to the First Nation, you can have an account. Here's the instances for which you can issue an alert.
Why would you let the First Nations have access to that then?
Because we're operating...
If you let the OPP do it...
We don't let the OPP do it. The Ontario government lets the OPP do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, I have 6 minutes. Wonderful.
I was wondering about that. Seconds.
I had the 5 minutes here. Okay, so what about training? So I know you do the software, but is there any element here to, from a provincial perspective, like training to ensure that that there is, proper alerts done? Because the community doesn't have confidence, doesn't have trust in the systems.
We train on how to use the technology. We're not public safety officials, so we don't train on, what's the threshold for when an alert should be sent or what the content should be. Although we provide examples of this is typically what you put in an alert, but we don't do that training. So it would be it's a public safety matter. People like Ms. Jesty would know it better than us. They just need the technical tool to issue the alerts.
And how do you deal with regions that don't have cell coverage? That don't have internet.
Yeah. So right now, all the alerts also go on radio, over the air radio, over the air TV. We have the Weather Network app. We're working on another app more specific to alerting because people might want to get alerts not just on the Weather Network app.
Thank you so much. We're going to move it over to Adrian LaRoche. Adrian, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And thank you, Mr. Eby, for being with us and for presenting your service, which is extremely useful, especially in an era of climate change where we receive these important alerts. So it's very useful. But I would first like to ask you a couple of questions that follow up on my colleagues' questions. And Ms. Vienne talked about technology and the problems that rural areas have receiving communications, because we know that access isn't the same everywhere. And in various rural areas, this can be a particular problem. So it's another case of inequality. And it is often in rural areas that this problem that we're dealing with is particularly problematic. Have you got any comments on that?
I know, absolutely, I agree. And it's really interesting to hear about all the different use cases, billboards, direct to landline. Anything is possible. We can do anything. Right now, we work under a structure where we get directed on what to do, and we've been directed to do TV, radio, and cell phone alerts. But all of that is possible, and I think wonderful. I mean, it's great to make sure you can reach everyone who needs to be reached.
I would also like to come back to what my colleague, Mr. Serret, said. We had a previous panel, as you know, and the collaboration is very important, and initiatives are already being undertaken by communities, as we just heard. How do you see the prospects for collaborating under the principle of reconciliation, where these initiatives need to be Indigenous-led?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I think what the previous witnesses said about working directly with the communities on this issue particularly is key. I mean, to make sure that they have the power to issue these alerts and to use the technology to its fullest extent is super important. This is a very specific use case. And so I think, obviously, you know, as mentioned, different approaches than what has been done to date are needed and should be used.
As well, I want to hear from you again about something that you raised. As soon as we talk about these new technologies, there is an issue of security of the personal information, and the CRTC has a role in that. So what are the control measures that can be put in place for alert services like yours to protect privacy and safety?
So, great question. The way the system works now is there is no privacy concern because it's one direction. It's over TV, radio, and the way the wireless alerts work directly to your cell phone. They're sent from a cell phone tower, and there's no return path. Nobody signs up. Nobody gives a phone number or any personal information. If you know, additional things like if you're talking about direct to landline phones, you might have to have phone numbers. So that would be something we would take on. Our company, Palmerex, as a company, because our apps, we've got 8+ million users in the country. We're privacy by design certified. We take privacy extremely, extremely seriously, and so you know we would use similar approaches if a situation existed where we needed to have personal information.
So there would be no need for legislation or regulations developed in order to make sure that that information was protected if the system was extended to include red dress alerts?
I don't know. I mean, what we do presently in terms of privacy is well beyond what's required under current privacy laws. So, you know, in our case, we wouldn't need any additional incentive. We would never jeopardize any privacy at all.
As you did for the Silver Alert in Quebec, where people may be lost with and who have cognitive problems, the same kind of system could be used for missing Indigenous women and girls. So where security is concerned, it would be a similar setup as for the Silver Alert. So this is something you could put in place quite quickly?
That's definitely one option, the way the Silver Alerts work. Again, they've chosen for Silver Alerts because it's usually a confined area where the person might have gone to. They're only using the cell phone channel. They're not using TV and radio, which is extremely broad because they have a better sense that the missing person is probably within, you know, blocks or within a confined urban area. So, you know, the system can be adjusted and used for different use cases, and that's a great example of one.
Thank you so much. We're now going to move it over to Benita. Benita, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Mr. Eby, for being here. And I know with you being the only witness now, you're getting a full hour of questioning from us, so I feel for you. I did just want to mention, though, I'm not sure if SORM is coming to this committee. Or they are? Okay, that's great.
Thank you for adding that.
I think we should definitely invite them to come, or at least some representation from there. So, Mr. Eby, I mean, we don't do procurement in this committee. We don't do anything that has to do with purchasing services or anything in this committee. So I understand and I hear you that you're just here to give technical experience as asked. I did, though, I note that you are the Regulatory Affairs and Government Relations person for Plumlorix. So I was wondering, in your role on Regulatory Affairs and Government Relations, if you have lobbied the federal government, and if so, what topics have you lobbied on, and what ministers or departments have you met with?
I am a registered lobbyist. I do meet with government officials. I've met with members here. I reach out all the time. The thing I talk about most with MPs is the NAD system, public alerting, how it works, because a lot of people don't understand that the Weather Network operates that system. The ask that in the past has been that when our license renewal comes up for our broadcasting services, we ask MPs to write into the CRTC and say, we think this is a great service and please support us. That's the nature of our lobbying largely. I've met with public safety ministers, environment ministers. Minister Anand is our local MP. We've had her to the office and met with her. Industry minister, things of that nature.
So that goes to my next question.
Sure.
So you mentioned that you're lobbying on changes to the CRTC. So my question is, this is a federal committee. Federal changes. Can you give us? I mean, this is an opportunity to get a number of MPs at one time to talk about the federal changes that would be needed, CRTC or others, that could assist in alerts. And I'm thinking today we heard much testimony that micro alerts might be as effective or more effective. So yeah, what are the changes that are needed?
Well, alerting is such an interesting field because, like I said, public safety is a provincial jurisdiction, but certain federal agencies have their own jurisdiction. Environment Canada obviously can issue a tornado alert in any province, but mostly it's run by the provinces. So this has always been a collective and a collaborative effort between the federal government and the provincial governments, and it's not really about changes so much as directing us to add new features to the alerting system. I mean, that's really what it's been about. Any lobbying I've done about federal government regulations recently has been related to the Broadcasting Act, and that's been specific to the work to regulate streaming services. And it's not really part of a public alerting file.
Okay, and then just on, it was mentioned in some of our testimony earlier about diversity, about inclusion, and I think about that in employment. It was even mentioned today in testimony about having Indigenous people in an organization, and I'm wondering if Plumlorix has Indigenous representation in the organization, and is there a movement around cultural sensitivity and understanding the nations across Canada?
Absolutely, there is a movement. I would have to ask HR. I don't believe we have many Indigenous employees. We have an Indigenous advisory circle of paid Indigenous advisors that we meet with a few times a year and ask them about content for the Weather Network and Meteo Media, things like the use of place names on our apps and websites, things like red dress alerts, and so definitely we are trying to push that movement forward. We recently launched a weather product across the Northern Territories in 6 Inuktitut dialects, airing on Uvagut TV, so just like the Weather Network local forecast, but in 6 different Indigenous languages. So we are sensitive to that and trying to do our best.
And then I guess my last question then is innovation in your space. What is happening in the way of innovation? Are there new platforms, new ways to communicate? What kind of innovation are you talking about in your industry?
In terms of alerting, or everywhere? I mean, innovation, we're an innovation company. We started as a broadcaster and, are the most popular Canadian app in Canada. We're constantly innovating. We're doing a lot of work with AI right now that we want to apply to certainly to weather forecasting and better early prediction of weather events, but that can be used in conjunction with alerting and all sorts of opportunities. So we're trying to push the envelope as much as we can as a Canadian company to take innovation to Canadians and to other countries around the world.
Right. Thank you so much for that. you said about provincial jurisdiction, so I was at something recently in BC. I'm in a BC MP, and Bowen Ma was there, the Minister on Public Safety was there talking about some alerts for climate change. I mean, we're dealing with climate change, so talking about some of those alerts with climate change. Are you aware of any other tables where provincial and territorial and First Nation, Métis, Inuit leadership are sitting that would be of importance to this this study? That
You got about 15 seconds to respond.
I'm not specifically, but I could get back to you if.
That would be wonderful. Because our time is limited, we're now going to reduce it to 3 minutes, 3 minutes, 1 minute, 1 minute. And when I say 1 minute, that kind of is flexible, okay? So I'm going to pass the floor over now to Anna, Anna, you have the floor for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you very much for being patient with us, but you're a very popular person today. So, you know, I live in a rural area, and I'm really happy that I have a generator because we have a lot of power outages. So my question to you is, and because my time is limited, I'm going to ask you to respond. What weaknesses in the alert systems in Canada, especially to rural areas, do you see?
There's obviously that final reach in terms of coverage can sometimes be an issue. You know, even if a town has good cell phone service in a rural area, when you get outside of the city, it's probably not as good. So, so certainly, I think that's well known, which is why we have the broadcast channel, we have the radio channel, because the propagation is usually quite good for that. But certainly, just that reach, and so taking the technology and adding additional channels to meet those needs, I think is important.
I guess the reason I bring this up is you're probably too young to remember this, but in 2003. Northeast blackout saw 50 million people lose electricity across Ontario and 7 American states. In 2013, of July the 8th, 300,000 Torontonians saw a power outage, and 1,400 passengers were trapped in trains and subways and whatnot. And I guess my question is, how do we, it took them hours and hours to get, free these individuals. So when there's a power outage to that magnitude, nothing works. And I can tell you, I lived through the 2003. At the time, I was working at a financial institution, and we had to shut everything down because, obviously, for reasons I'm sure you're aware. How can we communicate when things like this happen?
Well, I'm not too young to remember that.
Well, you look young.
Thank you. There are other discussions going on through the CRTC with the communications providers about that exact issue, because I think everybody recognizes it. I know out east when the hurricane came, a lot of power went down, and if there's not power to the cell phone towers, can you issue alerts? And so they're looking at can they share infrastructure with each other?
I'm going to stop you there for a second because I only have a few minutes, and I can tell you that there is a company in my riding that has a solution to that, but that's a topic for another day. The other question I want to ask you is we love to give our business to Canadian companies. How would you say your company differs than the company that was used, I believe, Everbridge? What do you see the differences there? Because we heard from our previous witnesses. Can you give us some comparison and cost measures as to, we just spent a fortune on Arrive scam, like, I don't know, $60 million. 80, thank you. So how cost efficient is your company compared to Everbridge?
You've got about 15.
As I mentioned, we've operated this alerting system since 2010 when it launched for free at no cost. So
we could have got the Arrive scan done by you guys for no cost? Oh my God, where have you been?
Okay. I'm going to pass it now over. It's okay. It's now passing over to Lisa. Lisa, you have the floor for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our one afternoon witness or one later witness today. And Kurt, you were speaking with my colleague, Ms. Zarillo, about people that you've lobbied, and you've actually met with me in my office in my previous role on the Heritage Committee, and we talked about broadcasting licenses and things like that. And one of the things I remember from that meeting is that, and I believe this is true, that when we buy a cell phone in Canada, it's not your weather app that's installed in these phones. It's the American Weather Network app that just comes preloaded on our phones. Would that cause any issues in rolling out a red dress alert through your system?
Well, that's a great question. That is true. All of our app users are gained by our company through reputation and quality. People actually have to go and download the Weather Network app themselves, and so we're super proud of that. We didn't pay to be on something. Right now, the broadcast immediate alerts don't go through the app. They just go right to your phone. But obviously, the Weather Network app does pass on the rest of the alerts, including those in Canada. So, having that on your phone helps make sure you'll get an alert if for some reason you're not in an LTE coverage zone or you're just working off of Wi-Fi and things like that. So having our app on your phone, that's one good reason to have it amongst many other good reasons.
And as some of my other colleagues have sort of intimated your vision of how this red dress alert would work through your system, you'd be like the Everbridge. Instead of Everbridge, we would use the Weather Network app. So could it be as culturally sensitive and as on the ground able to use? I mean, you've answered this a little bit, but I'm trying to envision whether the Weather Network could play the exact same role that Everbridge plays in Nova Scotia, in which it's completely community driven. There's no bureaucracy. It moves quickly. Could you replicate that as well through the Weather Network?
Absolutely, no question. Any technology that needs to be added, we can do. And I think, our track record is that we would take whatever steps is necessary to make it work, but also, as we heard from the previous witnesses, to make it work the right way, in a way that has trust and reliability.
And what I understood from your previous testimony is nobody pays you for the silver alert or the amber alert. Would it be the same for the red dress system? Would it be cost neutral for the people, the communities that are looking to have this service?
The way it works right now, because we have a fixed budget, is that budget is directed by all the provinces and territories. So I would envision that it is possible that there might have to be a commercial model to build out some additional channels. And we would wait to see, where does this committee and where do the results go for that?
Just really quickly, it would require a lot of negotiation with provinces and territories.
No, we could do it without that.
Great, thank you.
Excellent, thank you so much. Adrienne, we're going for a minute and a bit.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also want to ask you this question because the red dress alert is a recommendation that comes from various reports about violence against Indigenous women and girls. There was a budget last year, money in the budget, to make this a priority, to launch the red dress alert. Were you consulted? Did you have any discussions with the government about that action plan?
I was consulted by MPs Gazan, or reached out by MPs Gazan and Damoff about a year ago to ask kind of very similar questions to what's happening right now. How does the official system work, and how would you add red dress? And so I provided pretty much all the same information I'm sharing today about that.
I'm going to pass it over to Benita for your final question.
Thank you. So the question is, what are the relevant laws and regulations already in place to protect the use of personal information within alert systems in Canada?
I think the existing privacy law would be the law in place. It's not relevant for our current alerting system because it's a one-way distribution feed. We don't have any personal information within the system. None is gathered or used at all.
Great. That's it. You're done? Yeah.
Wow. I'll be honest, when I only said you only have so many seconds, I do want to ask a question and give a little bit of chair's prerogative here, if you don't mind. We talk a lot about it, and one of the things we've heard so much is about with missing and murdered Indigenous women. We know about that remote part, many of being much further north, so there may not be police. I spoke to somebody, 500 kilometers, there was one police officer. So when we're looking at that type of security, what is your reach into those types of communities, like remote and rural communities further north where they don't even sometimes have roads? So how would, if you were able to do something like the missing and murdered, the red dress alert, how would you be able to do it in the most remote areas?
Right. I mean, presently, as a broadcasting company and alerting provider, we reach those places, through satellite TV, and all the alerts are intrusive on satellite TV as well as on cable. There is cable in some remote areas, obviously, and there is cell phone service in some remote areas. As we discussed, there are areas still that could use, I think, better service, but we reach them that way as well. And so those are the ways that we do it today.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Well, on behalf of the committee, I would really like to thank you. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be suspending for just a few minutes. We have some issues on the red dress alert, budgets to pass, that kind of stuff. So we're going to suspend and be back in just 2 minutes. Thank you. We're going to get in. Hi, Michelle. Okay. Everybody, we're going to get back to committee business here. Michelle, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a list. You've got your hand up, but there's 5 motions that I need to get through today. So if there's additional business, we can absolutely add that. That's absolutely cool. But what I want to say is we have 5 motions that we must get through today, and it's just so that we can do the business of the committee. So I've got a list here, and so Michelle, I've got your name here.
Chair?
Yeah.
Do we mean to stay in public session here?
Actually, we can stay in public.
Okay.
Because what we're passing are actually just the budgets. There's nothing that is an issue of privacy here. No names, nothing of any.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, can't do that. No way. So the first thing is that we're looking at the proposed budget of the amount of $29,400 for the study of the red dress alert. And I'm just looking for adoption of that motion so that we can go forward with that study. Fantastic. Now, after saying this is where I'm also going to say to you, I think today we heard some excellent testimony. And I'm sure that we've all sent in lists. And now I've thought, we maybe have to ask a few others. I spoke to Leah Gazan earlier today and last night, potentially asking the minister. Maybe that's something that we want to look at. There's 2 different ministers that we could ask. She mentioned about Crown. Leah mentioned about Crown, and I'm going to just pass it over to Claire as she's looking at this to explain why.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, so as Madam Chair mentioned, there could be 2 departments and or ministers that the committee might be interested in hearing from. Crown Indigenous Relations is the department that would be responsible for the federal pathway for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. So that is actually where the consultations around that would include discussions on a red dress alert are going to be / kind of have been happening. So that is the department that would be responsible for that aspect. But then as the committee heard today, Indigenous Services has provided funding for example, Jennifer Jetsy's initiative. So there's an opportunity potentially for the committee to hear from both sides of the support that this red dress initiative is receiving from those departments, if they wished.
Yeah, so I just wanted to bring that to the committee, and exactly what Benita said too. We heard about SORM today and trying to understand what SORM is. We did a little research. You probably saw Claire and Alexi working on this, but SORM being that federal provincial. So what do they do? And that may be somebody that we want to bring to this committee as well. We are only listed for 4 meetings, meaning we only have 3 meetings left on this. And I think even after today, we probably know that we may want to go a little deeper. So I'm just going to ask all parties to go back to your lists because we want to make sure that we have the Indigenous voice, but we understand the technological side to it. And many of the groups that have come in are First Nations voices, but we do need that technical side too. So I'm just throwing it back at everybody. Please review your lists. If we need to rejig them, let's do that, but let's just make sure that we have a very fulsome study on this. So we've passed the committee, we passed the budget of 29.4, but we may have to add an extra meeting, but I think we should discuss that at our next meeting quickly. The next one is for a motion for the provision of mental health services to witnesses. And as a reminder, when we're having these types of meetings, sometimes it gets rather deep. And in our last one with Sport Canada, we wanted to ensure that athletes had the opportunity to speak to counselors as necessary. And I just want to make sure that that this motion says that in relation to the study of the red dress alert, the committee offer mental health support to the witnesses and that the clerk be authorized to make the necessary arrangements if requested. I'm looking for approval of that. Everybody's good on that. Fantastic. Great. Let's go. More work. Let's go. Instructions to the clerk and analyst for the news release. Earlier today, you should receive in your email box, there is the news release regarding the study, and that the clerk, so the motion is that the clerk and the analyst of the committee, in consultation with the chair, prepares a news release for publication on the committee's website at the start of the study upon presentation of the report to the House. So I just want to, upon the presentation, so that's later on, isn't it? The one in the beginning. One in the beginning. So this is the first one. Everybody has received the draft, and I just want to see if there's any questions or anything like that before we send the draft out on this study. Go ahead.
Just to clarify, because I did see that news release, and I forwarded it to a couple of people who I thought might want to do briefs, but so that hasn't gone public yet.
Only to us.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So,
hopefully,
you know something, I think we'll be
it
okay.
It seemed pretty safe. It was like, here's where to contact if you want to.
No, I think
brief.
that's
But
absolutely.
I continually meet people who I think would be great additions to this study. So I think my office has sent more names to the clerk in the meantime. And yeah, I love your idea that we might need more fulsome discussion.
And absolutely, and thank you, Lisa. If we have this news release, once we approve it, send it out to people because getting in this will be our next part when we need to do briefs because briefs are also very, very important here. So can I get just a passing of that? Everybody's read the press release? Everybody's okay with it? All in favor? Good. The next piece. Let's just continue with working. God, you guys have me working hard today. Motion for the deadline and word count for the submission of the briefs on the red dress. That in the context of the study of the red dress alert, the deadline for the submissions of briefs be no later than 4 p.m. on Thursday, April the 11th of 2024. And the briefs not exceed 2 pages, which is approximately 1,000 words. We have received briefs in the past that sometimes are novels. Yes, go ahead, Adrienne.
Oui, j'avais compris
I had understood that it was going to be the 16th, so I think I didn't catch the date properly. What date is the deadline?
The 11th, April the 11th for briefs is what our deadline would be. And that's kind of lining up with after we've seen all the testimony and gives everybody a chance for that. And once again, looking at 1,000 words or 2 pages. Any questions or comments? Everybody's in favor of that? Fantastic. That passes. I got another one here, ladies and gents. Okay, and this is regarding hospitality, that the clerk of the committee make the necessary arrangements for an informal meeting with the delegation of the Finnish parliamentarians on Monday, April the 8th, 2024, at which committee will provide coffee and a light snack. And we have looked into it. It's going to cost about $172. Everybody's okay? Anita's okay with that? Okay, good. Everybody, any other questions? All those in favor of that motion? Okay, fantastic. And further committee business, Michelle, you had your hand up.
Désolée, Madame la Présidente, ça va rapidement.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair. I missed the last point. I'm sorry. It was going too quickly.
Motion for hospitality, is that what you missed?
Parfait.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
On the minister with officials, I think around Indigenous, one minister or with officials?
Okay, very good question. So once again, I'm going to pass it over because as we're doing this meeting, we were looking at who's in charge, and that's exactly one of the issues. And so I'm going to have Claire read to you what she has found, and then we can decide who we need to see.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, so it's again up to the committee whether the committee wants to hear from both the ministers from Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs and Indigenous Services Canada. As I mentioned, one department is responsible, Crown Indigenous Relations is responsible for the federal pathway for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, where a lot of that roundtable discussion and consultation about a red dress alert is underway or is about to be underway. Whereas Indigenous Services Canada, according to witnesses that were here today, have provided funding for certain community-based initiatives. And so there's possibility of hearing from both of those departments. And then, as Madam Chair mentioned, SORM, which is essentially the senior officials responsible for emergency management, SORM, is a federal, provincial, territorial body that works to harmonize and improve emergency practices across the country. SORM includes representatives from provincial and territorial emergency management organizations and Public Safety Canada. So it's a collection of, there is one person that we have found who we are not sure if it's the right contact, so we haven't narrowed it down, but it seems like they would be able to speak about kind of a broad range of topics, potentially with that jurisdictional piece that the committee heard a little bit about today.
I know that on everybody's platters, we do not have to make the decision today, and that's why I'm asking everybody to go back, look at your lists, and we're going to make the clerk have to rework some more things. But I just think that we found out from today's testimony some different directions or different pathways that we may or may not need to go. So we can reassess that. Is it on this that you're referring a question on what I'm talking about, Adrian?
No, I just was looking at the various points, and I want to have the date for the Finnish delegation.
Okay, the Finnish delegation is on April the 8th. Okay? Okay, and Michelle, you had your hand up?
I did, Chair. Thank you very much, and thanks for all that and getting this done. I'm going to table a motion here today with April 1st just around the corner, and I'm going to ask for my colleagues' support on what I'm going to table. April 1st is April Fool's joke, or it's April Fool's Day, but a lot of Canadians struggling. In fact, 70% of Canadians, there's going to be a planned 23% increase in carbon tax. And so what I'm asking here today in the status of women is for support of the following motion. Given that A, Canadians are facing food insecurity in record numbers, and that one of the groups at the highest risk of facing food insecurity are single mothers. B, according to the Food Insecurity Among Canadian Families report using data from the 2021 Canada Income Survey, 48% of single mothers living below the poverty line struggle with food insecurity. And C, increasing the carbon tax by 23% on April 1st will only make food more expensive. In order to help single mothers afford groceries for their children, the committee report to the House its recommendation to immediately cancel the Liberal government's 23% carbon tax increase by April 1st. And that motion was sent in on Friday, March 15th, to everybody. And I think the reality is life has never been more unaffordable, but in particular food. I came back last week from a tour in New Brunswick, and I traveled a few food banks. And the demographic, not only are numbers at least double, but in some instances triple, the demographic of who is actually accessing these food banks is what is most concerning. In Oromoncto Food Bank, 40 to 50 military families, active serving military families, are accessing a food bank. This absolutely floored me. I had no idea. And I guess as status of women, it is our duty, and this is something that we can do right now, today. And I'm asking my colleagues directly to help make life more affordable in food. It is unbelievable the messages that are coming through across this country of people genuinely struggling to eat, and in particular moms and families who are trying to feed their kids. So I would ask in this Status of Women Committee today that they approve this motion and that we cancel the Liberal government's 23% carbon tax increase on April 1st. Thank you.
I have a speakers list. The next is Anna, Anita, followed by Adrian.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Michelle, because this is a very important cause, and it's dear to my heart because I spent New Year's Eve day at a food bank in Toronto where I saw the lineups, just I was appalled. I'll be honest, I was appalled. And a lot of the individuals in that lineup were mothers with children. And I will tell you, this particular food bank, by the name of SIDAM, they support everyone in the community. In 1 month alone, they served 3.17 million meals. And they also served 3,000 food baskets to seniors. These are individuals that can't afford to eat, and single mothers that are too ashamed to go anywhere else. And it really appalled me that if we really care, we need to pass this motion so that we can continue to feed our communities. This is Canada, and the number of people that have to use the food bank, it's appalling. I think we need to make sure that this doesn't go on. So I'm supporting this motion, Madam Chair, and I would like to see it go forward so that we're here for all single mothers and everyone to ensure that they don't go to bed hungry. Nobody goes to bed with an empty stomach. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know that there's been some questions on this. So it was sent on Friday, so it's been moved today, and it's debatable at this time. So go ahead, Adrienne. I know that there had been a change, so Adrienne, your turn.
Madame la Présidente, je ne sais pas, il est 12h58. Je ne sais pas combien de temps vous aviez prévu pour les débats.
Stop. Il n'y a pas une translation. Yeah, we need some translation.
I'm sorry. It's 12:58. I don't know how long we're going to continue this debate. So I think, I don't know if we have set aside this time for debating the motion, because certainly we're going to go over time. I know the motion was sent on Friday. It talks about food banks. Our next study is dealing with that, and Michelle also brought up violence on transit systems. I just don't know if this is what we want to be spending our time on right now.
And I'm sorry, Anita.
Yes, following on that, as the common practice in this committee is to discuss these things in the subcommittee, I move to adjourn debate.
Debatable motion, so we will take a vote here.
Okay, the vote is on to adjourn the debate. Ms. Lambropoulos.
In favor.
Monsieur Serré. Oui. Mrs. Sidou.
Yes.
Mrs. Absiner. Yes. Mrs. Vandelbelt.
Yes.
Mrs. Ferrari.
No.
Mrs. Roberts.
Absolutely no.
Madame Vien. No. Madame Larouche.
Oui.
Madame Zarillo. Yes pour 7, nays contre 3.
Okay, so the motion is defeated. Seeing any other committee business, anything else? Seeing none, today's meeting is adjourned. See you Thursday.
Oui, effectivement, c'était